Welcome. We have an important guest today. Obaidullah Baheer is a lecturer at the American University in Afghanistan, specializing in conflict resolution. He is also the grandson of a Mujahideen fighter who went on to become an infamous warlord in Afghanistan. Mr. Bahir received a Western education at the University of New South Wales in Australia. At one point, he wanted to join the insurgency, but his father would not allow it. His father was jailed at a CIA torture site and was released in 2008. When the Taliban took control of Afghanistan, his father went on television to praise the Taliban. Mr. Bahir has decided to stay in Kabul, but has given help to many of his friends who were leaving and has been there to help so many people who are trying to survive and thrive in Afghanistan today. Mr. Bahir, thank you so much for being with me. I'm grateful.
Thank you for having me, Marianne.
I was asking you before we came on the podcast if you had ever been to the United States, and you were telling me that there was a story there. So tell it to me now.
Well, it's a two-part story. Initially, it's when your grandfather is on the blacklist of the UN Security Council and the United States entry list, the chances of you getting a visa are quite low, which is one of the reasons why when I was applying for my postgrad, I chose Australia over the United States, even though Tufts University was a university I was really eyeing for. But the other funny bit is how my dwindling prospects of ever coming to the United States were further ruined by a misquote of an interview I gave on Sky News, in which they asked me what I felt about Biden's recent remarks about Afghanistan. And I said that Biden's remarks felt like a punch in the gut, after which the person who's punched you tells you about all the nice things they did to you after punching you in the gut, which doesn't make sense because once he decided to withdraw unconditionally, he had pushed us into the rough waters, and whatever he did after that was irrelevant. And the newspapers misquoted me saying, I would like to punch Biden in the gut. And I was like, great, there goes my prospects of ever getting an American visa because I am a direct threat to the president. So just to put it out there, I do not intend on punching Biden in the gut. I think he's very old for that, and I would never do anything like that as well. I am very peaceful being myself.
Well, I certainly understand what it is like to be misquoted in the U.S. media, but in your case, the issue is far more serious. You are an important figure, and you seem to embody, your very life is an embodiment of the divergence between two cultures. You grew up around the Islamist, is that fair to say, culture? And yet at the same time, you are a young man, a modern man, not only modern in terms of exposure to Afghan culture over the last 20 years, but also to international culture. You have, I believe it's taken a brave stance. I heard you say earlier that it was one of those things which you obviously felt was your destiny, and I honor that. But still, it's a profoundly hopeful stance of the help that you can be in helping to create what I heard you say on another interview, is a breathable space for civil society at this time. My first question to you is, it's 13 days after the official end of the U.S. evacuation from Afghanistan. The Taliban has announced an interim government. We did receive reports today that the humanitarian crisis is extreme. Up to 1 million children could die of starvation. Give us your sense, and also specifically what it is so much that you want those of us in the Western world to understand about where Afghanistan is now, what is going on there, and how we can help.
Sometimes a lot of issues that we face on day-to-day basis and on a larger scale within countries, regions, and globally, there are blessings in disguise. And again, I'm someone who's taught conflict transformation, which is a way of looking at conflict in which you try to seek the opportunity that it presents. Because if you're going to change the world and start all over, you can probably start over in a better way. And here in Afghanistan, obviously, we were in such a horrible state that anything was an improvement on the status quo, meaning we were in a world where close to 100 people were dying every day. There's the story of the coffin maker in Jalalabad city who is not selling coffins anymore at the rate that he used to, and he's happy about it because lesser people are dying. I've talked to military pilots who used to tell me that they would fly out 14 young men only to fly out their corpses in 3 days from the same location they dropped them. Um, so that was what we were looking at. And then the Taliban blitzer of 11 days took over Afghanistan. It was such a swift and quick takeover that it shocked the Taliban themselves as well. They didn't expect to be able to take over the whole country so quickly. And obviously, there are a million different reasons we can talk about as to why that happened. But our reality is that the Taliban are now in control. They've announced a caretaker government, despite their own rhetoric and expectation of the world that it be somewhat inclusive. With regards to ethnicities and gender, it is a male, ethnocentric, Taliban exclusive cabinet that they announced, and they give it the title of a caretaker government, but you don't really expect the top brass leadership of the Taliban to believe in a caretaker or a temporary position on at the cabinet, because you can't really turn around to members. Again, I think out of the 30 odd members, 15 or more are on the international blacklist, and you don't get on the blacklist unless you're really notorious and have um, played a huge role in the fighting. So they see the cabinet appointments as spoils of war, and they think that it is their rightful bounty to get those positions. And if you think that they're ever going to let that go, I think that would be a very silly assessment of or prediction of the future. So yeah, Afghanistan's in a very difficult position because right now, for us youth and especially the academics, I had a call with a few academics from Afghanistan yesterday, and we were trying to discuss how to move forward, because it's not just that the circumstances are different, but the world is reinvented. So you have to really have discussions on basic things such as corporal punishment. What do you say about it? Like, you would think that these are discussions that have happened and ended and the world has moved on. And then you restart with, should women be allowed to work? How can we convince the Taliban that they too deserve to be in the workforce, that economic prosperity is directly linked to this, or have any rational argument or dialogue with the Taliban? Is there any point to it to begin with? Then, if there's no point to that, because it's not like they'll listen to us, they'll look to their religious scripture and say, this is what religion says and this is what we would do, meaning opinions are irrelevant. Then the only thing left for us right now is to engage in dialogue, to get the youth to think about the situation and understand, comprehend, and process the changes that have happened in Afghanistan. So we're trying to work towards that, and we're trying to give the Taliban time, and we're hoping that before it's too late, they realize their own limitations and realize that there's a lot about governance and government that they don't understand, and they would need people who have experience and technocrats who can help them out. And we're hoping that facing that absurd and arduous task and challenge, they realize that they really need to listen to other people and listen to reason. So um, and the international community right now is again in a very difficult position as well, because it's easier to sleep better at night knowing that, oh, you've passed some sort of sanctions on the Taliban regime, but is that going to change how they treat people in the country? Is that going to change how they view governance or think about international norms? No, it's not. It is much more difficult and much more um, result inducing if you sit down with the Taliban and engage with them. Don't recognize them, but engage with them. Help support the Afghan people. And there are a gazillion ways to do that.
When you say there are a gazillion ways to do that, can you tell us some of what they are?
Look, let's just start from one sector to the other. Academia. there are scholars at risk here. There are people who are smart, they're intellectuals, they can help shape future generations, but they can't do that if they stay in Afghanistan. Why aren't Western universities opening their doors to these academics? Again, if you've ever been to a university and understand their economic model, it doesn't take more than 4 or 5 students to pay the salary of the lecturer. Beyond that, everything is business. So why can't universities actually, and there are organizations out there such as Scholars at Risk and so on and so forth, but they take their time and there is bureaucracy. I think there should be more urgency to that. There are families here under threat, whose younger members have left and they are in the US. They are safe, but their families are not, and their families receive threats and are under danger. Those can be facilitated, and the whole process of SIVs and P1 and P2 visas can be expedited. Um, Beyond that, economic aid and international organizations engaging with Afghanistan. Look, there is no brick and mortar left from IGOs in Afghanistan, meaning that their staff has left. So imagine when those 1 million children are facing hunger and death. By the time the international community comes and sets up here again, it'll be too late, right? So there has to be a plan with regards to early warning systems and preventive diplomacy to understand exactly how we can prevent the catastrophe that is going to soon take shape in Afghanistan. We don't have cash, we don't have liquidity in the economy. The banks are giving out only $200 a week. How do you expect families to survive on that? Um, People are selling their furniture, their jewelry. Even I think the Times narrated a story of a man selling his daughter just to keep the other 5 or 6 children that he had alive. Um, so there's a lot you can do, and beyond that, as an individual, you can turn around in your own localities and see how many Afghans have come and sought refuge. Go to those camps, show those people that the humanity that you share with them, and the kindness you have in you, because for them there's a black box of a system that brought them to that country, but they really need to be introduced to you. They need to see the humanity in you, and that's going to shape their impression of the United States for years and decades to come.
You are playing such a unique role, speaking to quite a bit of Western media right now. How is it that you are safe to do this?
Don't jinx it, Marianne. But I think part of it is my family background as well, and my grandfather, being who he is, gets me some sort of safety net that other people do not have. And I just personally am a very core believer in the idea of Uncle Ben telling Spider-Man that with great power comes great responsibility. So I feel like just by virtue of belonging to the household that I do, it gives me some leeway to be able to shake the bush and say things that a lot of people cannot say. But that being said, I think I might actually be reaching the end of my rope, with that luxury as well. I have received informal communication telling me that I'm probably making a lot of people uncomfortable, um, which makes it very difficult just to think of the prospects of having to leave home um, and going abroad and just everything that you've imagined, everything that you've loved and aspired to do in your own country for your own people, just to know that there could be a
Well,
day where you cannot raise your voice and you probably have to move further away in order to be able to use your voice in the future.
it's very moving, very impressive and admirable the way you have used your privilege already to be of service to others. I know that I speak not only for myself, but for so many who have listened to you. We want you to take care of yourself. We have seen how deeply you reflect, and many of us are clear you have great service to give in the future to your country and possibly to the world. And I know I speak for so many others, just wishing you the very, very best. Now, You already said that although so many of us had hoped that the Taliban's conversation about a more inclusive government, etc., we had hoped there would be truth to that. But as you've just said, it has turned out to be pretty old school Taliban so far. You spoke of the people who are part of the government who are on that notorious blacklist. They claim to be a caretaker government, but there is no reason to think that that will necessarily be true. Do you feel that as time goes by, I'm sure there is such emotional anxiety, depression, fear within the hearts of so many people there. Do you feel that the spirit of your country is such that there will be a great rising up and that the transition that we need to happen? You were mentioning another interview. You spoke of Iran. You spoke of Saudi Arabia. You said that there are other very conservative Muslim countries that have responded to some pressure within their civil societies. Do you see the possibility of Afghanistan moving in that direction?
There's a law of alchemy that says nothing of great worth can be achieved without giving up something of equal worth in return. It says that the genius of Einstein led to Hiroshima. And if you flip that around, it means for good times to come, there have to be a lot of bad times and a lot of sacrifices that are given. And I fear that it's going to take so long and so much more sacrifice for that transition to ever eventually actualize into something better. And it's just that despite the criticism we have of the Taliban, we don't want the Taliban to fail, because in the absence of a democratic process and them being in absolute power, even if they fail, they will be dead weight for the next decade or two on Afghanistan until another bloody uprising happens and another change in regime happens. And that's always going to be a violent affair. This country has been suffering for 40 years, and that's 3 generations that have lost their lives to this war, their childhoods to these wars. I mean, look at the videos of the Taliban. They go to parks and they're men 30 odd years old. They're sitting on swings and losing their minds to the happiness and the joy that they have there. That means that this is a generation that was robbed of their childhood because of these wars, because of these indoctrinations. So I know it's difficult to believe, but underneath that turban and beard is an actual person that grew up to believe in ideas that never belonged to them. And today we're face to face. It's just us who grew up in a very different, or not just specifically me, but the liberals within Kabul are face to face with the conservative radical Taliban. And there's no other option. There is no opting out. There is either coexisting or going to war again. And how do we then coexist? How do we make that happen in a better way? Which is why it really pains us when the Taliban take matters into their own hands or heavy-handedly approach security and demonstration or torture and rendition. And we really hope that there can be a more humane and non-violent kind of reconciliation and transition and integration of society. And that means large scale programs, that means a civil led movement. And for all of that to happen, there has to be physical security, and these people should be allowed to raise their voice. And if the Taliban don't do that, it will be a huge missed opportunity. And then our generation will leave the country as well, and we'll come back 20 odd years later with gray hair, and we won't recognize the country or the youth that we see then. They will not recognize us. And basically, the dreams we had for the country would be dead at that point.
How extraordinary, given your background, given your experience, given the fact that you yourself are an expert on conflict resolution. What an amazing opportunity there is, just in your wisdom, in your understanding, in your expertise, in your knowing. And I hope that those who can do the most to take advantage of it will do so. What are the most beautiful aspects of Afghan culture, the most beautiful aspects of the people and the spirit of the Afghans that we need to know, that those of us who know that it's there most wish to know?
I think Afghans are extremely hospitable people. I mean, I had to discuss the evacuation of a friend from this city to another, and all I had to do was call a friend and say, I need a family to find safety and be given shelter for an indefinite period of time. And the next thing that I hear is, you don't even need to ask, just tell me when they're coming here. Um, there are a lot of things that aren't really perfect about Afghans, but what really bewilders me is, despite the 40 odd years of war, the fact that there is so much humanity preserved is mind blowing. I mean, look at the United States. Whenever a flood hits or the security apparatus is gone for a few hours, imagine all the looting that happens. Kabul was um, basically a headless chicken for almost 12 hours straight. And yes, looting did happen, but not at the scales that you would imagine in other parts of the world. So there are quite a few good things about the Afghan culture. It's a culture very deeply ingrained in respect for elders, for there's a sense of community, tribalism, and all of those obviously are used sometimes negatively as well. But there is so much to this culture. I mean, this culture is so hospitable. We have something called Ninawate in the Pashtun culture, which means that if, God forbid, someone kills a member of my family and they come to my door and seek refuge in my own house, I am not allowed to seek vengeance and retribution because now they have given up their safety to me and I have to guard them. There's actually a joke about that where um, an Afghan is driving his friend around and showing him his lands, his cattle, his farms, his house. And then eventually he's like, well, this we're now approaching my enemy's territory, so you better duck your head. And he's like, technically, shouldn't you be the one ducking your head if it's your enemy's territory? And he's like, nah, I shot their guest the other day, so they're probably going to shoot my guest as well. So, yeah, just a little dark humor in
Oh,
difficult days.
there was a guest, Tom Freston, on my program the other day who lived in Afghanistan during the 1970s and was there quite a bit over the last 20 years. He said he had an old tourist pamphlet from Afghanistan in the 1970s that said, "Welcome to Afghanistan, the world's friendliest people."
Yeah.
So that would go along with the things that you just said. Do you foresee a time when, in your lifetime, when people who have left Afghanistan, forming almost a new Afghan diaspora, will one day be able to return to your country with pride and safety and happiness?
I think that that thought is what keeps me going. And there are a few good aspects to it as well. Like the diaspora that left have family members that are still in Afghanistan. And that means no matter what they do, they will be economically supporting their families back home as well, which creates a new um, revenue for the people within the country, which is good. But know that we are 200 lecturers less in Afghanistan. We've had hundreds of doctors leave the country, and the doctor to patient ratio is in the thousands in Afghanistan. We don't have as many engineers in the country. There is a design department in the Ministry of Construction, which used to have 25 engineers, I think, and it's barely a few, three or four left in the country. So right now, it's a huge challenge for Afghanistan as to how to function without all of those brains and the whole brain flight, let's say, or brain drain that happened. But on the other end, I really do hope that the Taliban, even though they already missed an opportunity because they could have gained the trust of the population by taking very simple measures and showing them that they had a place within Afghanistan, But a lot of the actions that were done ended up pushing people away, ended up scaring them because number one amongst your Maslow's hierarchy of needs is your own physical security. And if you're not going to feel safe, nothing else matters. Um, and here, if they can show the world that there's just enough space for people to make a difference, for people's voices and opinion to be heard, for policies to be open to evolution and change, that would create enough room. A lot of these people that left with such heavy hearts, and most of them left their hearts back home as well. And they wouldn't have left in 100 lifetimes, but they were forced to. And they will come back the moment they see an opportunity. So, can the Taliban be smart enough to show them that there is an opportunity to come back and serve their country? It's really up to them. The ball's in their court.
Once again, it is so impressive and admirable that you stayed. There is so much wisdom that you could provide the Taliban, and there is so much hope that you could provide and are providing not only Afghans in your country, but Afghans elsewhere who are hearing you on these interviews, and also those of us who are not Afghan but have come to care so much. Please let me know if there's ever any way that further public exposure, public communication that I might be able to provide would be of value to you. I pray for your safety, as I know everyone does who hears you. I feel you have a great destiny, and you are already embodying it in some very profound ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Just one last thing is, for those who are interested in seeing more of my work, I am very active on Twitter. There is a conference
What a
coming
world
up.
we live in that you're telling
Yeah.
me you're active on Twitter. By all means, please give us your Twitter handle.
Yeah, no, actually, a very important bit is, I actually want to tell people that I'll be speaking at Oxford University in 8 days. So I'm speaking about the narrative war within Afghanistan and how that was lost to the Taliban. So I think it's a very academic discussion, and people are free to join and register for it. Um,
That will be virtually, that will be online.
Yeah, so again, with COVID and everything, it's a hybrid conference. So some guests are going in there physically. I'll be speaking online, but I'm speaking on 22nd September there. So hopefully it'll be something useful, academic, and for those who want to understand that angle within the war, are free to join.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Bahir, thank you so much for being with us. I'm very grateful, and I wish you the very best.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.